The collapse never starts with sirens. It starts quietly, with numbers that stop making sense. With prices that rise faster than wages, with promises that suddenly feel fragile. And by the time people realize what's happening, the window to protect themselves is already closing. Subscribe, like this video, and stay till the end, because this isn't about fear. It's about survival. History leaves warnings everywhere, but only those who recognize the pattern survive it. November 1923, Germany. A single loaf of bread costs 200 billion marks. Money that once bought homes, land, and security can no longer buy breakfast. Savings that took a lifetime to build turn into meaningless paper in less than 5 years. Not because people were reckless. Not because they were lazy. But because they trusted a system that could no longer hold itself together. And yet not everyone was destroyed. Some people endured. Some even emerged stronger, not because they predicted the collapse, but because they followed rules that survive every collapse. Fast forward. Argentina, 2001. Banks shut their doors. Accounts are frozen. People line up outside ATMs that no longer work, watching their financial lives disappear behind glass. Dollar savings are seized and forcibly converted into pesos at an exchange rate designed to protect the state, not the people. Overnight, 2/3 of lifetime savings vanish. Again, chaos for most. But survival for a few, and once more, it wasn't luck. It was principles. Now look at the present. America, December 2025. $36 trillion in national debt. A currency that has lost nearly all of its purchasing power since the early 20th century. Trillions created in just a few years to hold a fragile system together. The pattern is not new. It is identical to the moments that came before every major currency collapse in recorded history. The only uncertainty is timing. 5 years, 15 years, the outcome doesn't change. When the break finally happens, the same rules will decide who keeps their life intact and who loses everything. This story is not about getting rich. It's about avoiding total loss. Because in every collapse, most people don't fail because they were foolish. They fail because they followed advice that only works when systems are stable. Advice that assumes banks function, that courts enforce contracts, that governments keep promises. And when those assumptions break, so does everything built on top of them. That's why principles matter more than tactics. A tactic says, buy this asset, sell that one. It depends on timing, on policy, on conditions you cannot control. A principle is different. A principle works regardless of the country, the currency, or the century. Principles protected people when gold was money. They protected people when paper replaced gold. And they will protect people when the next system replaces this one. Most financial advice today is built for normal times. Diversify your portfolio. Trust long-term averages. Rely on institutions. But collapse is not normal. Banks fail, markets freeze. Governments change the rules mid-game. And when that happens, tactics collapse with the system. Principles do not. The first principle is brutal, but history proves it again and again. When currencies die, paper burns. And only what is real survives. Germany 1918 to 1923. A bank account holding 100,000 marks made you wealthy after the war. 5 years later, that same balance couldn't buy bread. The numbers grew. The wealth vanished. But farms still produced food. Buildings still provided shelter. Factories still made goods. The prices changed. The reality did not. This same truth repeats everywhere. Zimbabwe 2008. Hyperinflation so extreme that prices doubled within hours. Savings were annihilated. But land still grew crops. Livestock still held value. Tools still worked. Argentina. Frozen accounts. Forced conversions. Paper wealth erased, yet physical assets remained. Collapse doesn't destroy value, it exposes what never had it. In America today, most wealth exists only as claims. Claims on earnings, claims on repayment, claims on institutions staying solvent, stocks, bonds, retirement accounts. Bank balances. They work until the system enforcing those claims stops functioning. When that moment arrives, paper promises fade. But land remains land. Gold remains gold. Production remains production. This is not ideology. It's arithmetic. And this is only the first rule. Because survival has never depended on a single decision, but on a framework built long before crisis arrives. There is a difference most people never learn until it's too late. The difference between something that produces value and something that only looks valuable because everyone agrees to believe it is. This is the second principle. Own productive assets, not speculative ones. A productive asset creates value even if no one is buying. A speculative asset only has value if you can sell it to someone else. And during collapse, buyers disappear first. Look back to the Great Depression, 1929 to 1933. The stock market collapsed nearly 90%. Paper fortunes evaporated. Not slowly, violently. People who believed wealth was numbers on a screen lost everything. But farmers still harvested crops. Landlords still housed tenants. Small businesses still produced goods. People needed to survive. A farm doesn't care what the stock index says. It grows food whether markets are euphoric or completely broken. Speculation depends on confidence. Production depends on reality. This pattern repeats again and again. Venezuela, the 2010s. On paper, the stock market exploded upward, hundreds of thousands of %. But the currency collapsed so badly that those gains meant nothing. People became millionaires who couldn't buy groceries. Meanwhile, bakeries kept operating, transport companies kept moving goods. Farms kept feeding people. A bakery didn't need investor confidence. It needed flour, heat, and customers who were hungry. Contrast that with government bonds. They only had value if the state could pay. When the state failed, the bonds went to zero. In collapse, belief collapses faster than production. Now look at America. December 2025. Most assets are speculative. Stocks are priced for growth. Real estate is bought to flip. Digital assets rely entirely on sentiment. Very little is owned for what it produces. A rental property with no debt that people must live in is productive. A business that delivers essential services is productive. A piece of land that grows food is productive. But assets purchased only for appreciation are bets. And collapse is when bets are settled. When markets freeze, you cannot sell. When credit dries up, buyers vanish. When fear dominates, liquidity disappears. Productive assets don't need liquidity. They give you food, shelter, income. Speculation gives you hope. And hope is not a survival strategy. This is why collapses feel unfair. Because people who did everything right, according to modern financial advice, often lose everything. While those who focused on production survive quietly, and then comes the third principle. The one most people refuse to accept until it destroys them. Debt feels powerful in good times. But in collapse, debt is a weapon pointed at your own head. Debt looks harmless when everything is working. Even smart. Borrow to grow. Borrow to expand. Borrow because tomorrow looks bigger than today. But collapse turns leverage into a trap. And this is the third principle. Debt doesn't bend in a crisis. It breaks people. In stable times, debt magnifies gains. In collapse, it magnifies pain. The problem is simple. When systems break, income falls. But debt does not. The bank still wants payment. The contract still exists. And if you can't pay, ownership disappears. The Great Depression proved this brutally. During the 1920s, American farmers borrowed heavily. Land prices were rising. Credit was easy. Borrowing felt logical. Then 1929 hit. Crop prices collapsed. Farm income fell by more than half. But the loans stayed exactly the same. Between 1930 and 1935, more than 750,000 farms were foreclosed. Families who had worked the same land for generations lost everything. Not because they were careless, but because they were leveraged. Compare them to farmers who owned land outright. They suffered. They struggled, but they survived. No payments meant no foreclosure. Debt-free ownership turned hardship into endurance. Debt turned hardship into ruin. This pattern repeats globally. Argentina, 2001. Middle-class families held mortgages denominated in dollars. When the peso collapsed, their income fell by nearly 2/3, but their debt stayed fixed. The math became impossible. Foreclosures followed. People lost homes they had paid into for over a decade. Those who owned homes outright kept them. Same crisis. Same economy, different outcome. Greece, the 2010s. Wages cut, pensions slashed, mortgage balances unchanged. Defaults exploded. Debt didn't care that the economy collapsed. Now look at America. December 2025. $17 trillion in household debt. Mortgages, auto loans, student loans, credit cards. This is not resilience. This is fragility stacked on top of fragility. Some argue inflation saves debtors. That rising prices reduce the real value of what you owe. That only works if income rises faster than prices. In real collapses, income collapses first. Inflation helps governments, it rarely helps households. Here is the uncomfortable truth. If a bank can take it, you do not own it. A house with a mortgage is not a home. It is a conditional agreement. A house owned outright cannot be seized because income dropped. Debt is fuel during expansion, but during collapse, debt is execution. And yet, even owning assets free and clear is not enough. Because history shows that property, money, and businesses can all be taken. Which leads to the fourth principle. The only form of wealth that survives borders, regimes, and confiscation. Every empire eventually proves the same truth. You can lose land, you can lose money, you can lose businesses. But what you know travels with you. This is the fourth principle. Skills are the only truly portable wealth. History's darkest moments make this painfully clear. Europe, the 1940s. Jewish families owned homes, shops, factories, savings. The state took all of it. Property was seized. Accounts were frozen, businesses were confiscated. But the people who survived were often those who could do something useful. Doctors treated, engineers repaired. Tailors made clothing, craftsmen built what others needed. A skilled person could trade labor for food, could find work even inside broken systems. Those who owned wealth but had no skills were stripped naked by history. The same pattern emerged after the Russian Revolution, 1917. Private property abolished overnight. Aristocrats lost estates, titles, and fortunes. But engineers, physicians, and skilled laborers were still needed. The state required them. Their skills gave them leverage even under total control. Vietnam, 1975. Saigon fell. Millions fled with nothing. They couldn't carry property. They couldn't carry businesses. Those who rebuilt fastest were not the richest. They were the most capable. Doctors, mechanics, accountants, technicians. They arrived empty-handed and rebuilt entire lives from skill alone. Now consider America. December 2025. Most wealth exists inside systems. Retirement accounts, real estate, financial markets. None of it is portable. If capital controls appear, you may not access your money. If relocation becomes necessary, your assets stay behind. But skills go with you. The uncomfortable question is simple. If systems stopped working tomorrow, what could you produce? Food, repair, construction. Most people have never needed to answer that question. Which is precisely the danger. Skills create value without permission, without institutions, without stability. They are the foundation of rebuildable wealth. And yet even skills alone are not enough. Because humans do not survive collapse as isolated individuals. That brings us to the final principle. The one modern society has almost completely forgotten. When systems collapse, they don't fail evenly. Institutions fail first, banks close, governments stall. Police thin out, supply chains snap. And in that vacuum, only one structure remains standing: human trust. This is the fifth principle. Local networks outlast all institutions. History proves this relentlessly. The Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s. The state dissolved. The currency imploded, pensions stopped. Stores emptied. Survival did not come from banks. It came from families. From neighbors sharing food, from informal trade, from community protection. Those embedded in strong local networks endured shortages that destroyed isolated individuals. Argentina, 2001, banks locked doors. People couldn't access money they legally owned. So neighborhoods reorganized. Barter systems emerged. Skills were exchanged for food. Labor replaced currency. The people who survived best were not the richest. They were the most connected. Lebanon, 2019 onward. The currency lost nearly all value. Banks became unusable, yet society did not fully collapse. Why? Because life was already organized around family, religious, and community networks. Before modern institutions, all economies ran on trust. You traded with people you knew. You borrowed from those who knew you would repay. Modern systems scaled beyond trust. But when those systems fail, we return to it instantly. Now look at America. December 2025. Most people are institutionally dependent and locally isolated. You trust a bank but don't know your neighbor. You rely on supermarkets but don't know a farmer. You assume protection from systems you've never met. This is not efficiency, it is fragility. When institutions fail, there is no backup. Strong local relationships become food security, they become safety, they become survival infrastructure. These are the 5 principles. Hard assets survive. Paper burns. Productive assets endure. Speculation collapses. Debt destroys in crisis. Skills travel when everything else is taken. Local trust outlives every institution. Notice what is not here. No stock tips. No magic investments. No promises of timing the collapse. Those are tactics. And tactics die with systems. Principles survive systems. They survived Rome. They survived Weimar. They survived Argentina. They will survive America. The power of principles is that they don't require prediction. You don't need to know if collapse comes in 5 years or 15. Hard assets protect you either way. Productive assets serve you either way. Debt elimination strengthens you either way. Skills raise income now and preserve life later. Local networks enrich stability and save lives in chaos. The mistake most people make is waiting for certainty. But collapse never announces itself. By the time it's obvious, the exits are already closed. These principles are ancient because human behavior never changes. Debt always exceeds repayment. Currencies are always debased. Institutions always overextend. This isn't prophecy, it's pattern recognition. Position yourself by principle, and timing no longer controls your fate. Ignore them, and you are betting that you'll escape what history has never forgiven. If this changed how you think about money, power, and survival, subscribe, because the next video breaks down the modern tactics that align with these principles. Which hard assets actually make sense in a digital economy? Which productive assets still work today? How to eliminate debt strategically? Which skills matter most now? And how to build real local networks in an isolated society. The principles tell you what survives. The tactics show you how to apply them. The only real question is this: